The hearing will come to order. Let me welcome everyone and say good afternoon. I'm very pleased to have this hearing and allow members to present testimony on their thoughts and priorities for the FY 2020 Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and related agencies bill. As I remind people all the time, the work of this subcommittee is far-reaching and it touches the lives of every citizen and millions abroad throughout our international food delivery programs. Everything from research to conservation to food safety to domestic and foreign nutrition to food and drug safety to commodity futures. So this subcommittee has a lot to consider. We're still at the beginning of the process, but this is an important day as we hear from our colleagues. Testifying today, we have a number of members from each party that represent different parts of the country. The subcommittee has a reputation for working across the aisle, and I expect that bipartisan spirit to continue this year. I look forward to hearing from all of you today and working with us as the process moves forward. And at this time, I'm happy to recognize my colleague, Mr. Fortenberry, for any opening remarks that he might have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really do appreciate your emphasis on bipartisanship. Agriculture is one of the areas that can, when there is the will, transcend any perceived divides, and that's why I think it's good that the general perception of the public is countered by the way in which this committee operates under your leadership. So thank you very much. I want to also welcome the members. Mr. Thompson, you're here first, and others who will join us. Agriculture represents a cross-section of diverse constituencies and regions affecting us all. The food security space is absolutely critical part of America's public policy and one that is often overlooked. And yet, as we all saw last year, we came together to pass a bipartisan farm bill, and now we're in the process of implementing that. But it's great to be here. Again, I thank you for your emphasis on the bipartisan dynamic of the committee and look forward to hearing from our members.
Thank you, Mr. Fortenberry. I will now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Glenn Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you. Chairman Bishop, Ranking Member Fortenberry, members of the subcommittee, thank you for your leadership and your service with the appropriations process. Very much appreciated. And I want to thank you specifically for the opportunity to be here this afternoon to share my priorities for the Agriculture Appropriations Bill for the fiscal year 2020. The program under this subcommittee's jurisdiction, the programs play an integral role in supporting our farmers, ranchers, and, quite frankly, rural America, while also ensuring that America will always have the world's most abundant, safest, and most affordable food supply. As a lifelong Pennsylvanian, agriculture has always been a critical segment of the Commonwealth's economy. Remains our #1 industry today. However, times have been tough for many farmers in Pennsylvania and many others commodities around the nation over the last decade. In fact, average farm income has been cut in half over the past 5 years for a variety of reasons. The dairy industry in particular has been hit hard over the past decade as we lost markets and milk consumption has decreased over that period. With this in mind, I'm pleased that we're able to get the 2018 Farm Bill across the President's desk this past December, and I thank all of you for your support through the process. The Farm Bill provides strong support for our bedrock agriculture conservation programs, and that's where I'd like to start. These include the Conservation Stewardship Program, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program, and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Now, these programs help provide farmers and ranchers the tools to be able to implement best management practices on their operations to improve water quality, soil health, and the environment, along with farm productivity. In short, these programs are good for the environment and the long-term sustainability, fiscal health of our nation's farms and ranches. In Pennsylvania, we're also continuing our efforts to restore the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which makes these programs all the more important. That said, I request full funding for our agricultural conservation programs and the NRCS in accordance to the 2018 Farm Bill. From conservation to crop insurance and energy programs to emergency loans, the Farm Service Agency, FSA, provides the boots on the ground for farmers. Because of this important role in providing local expertise and outreach, I request robust support for FSA. Similarly, we must continue to fund and support agriculture research and extension activities. Agriculture is science and technology today, and we need that support at both our land-grant universities, but also other higher education institutions. So much important research is performed at our universities, but without the necessary funding and resources, such work wouldn't get out to actually benefit farmers and ranchers. And as such, I strongly support full funding for both the Agriculture Research Service and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. In terms of animal and plant health inspection services, or APHIS, like all farm areas, Pennsylvania continues to have serious challenges with invasive species. While we've had some success in dealing with these threats over the years, our latest pest wreaking havoc is the spotted lanternfly. First identified in 2014, this insect has been spreading in Pennsylvania. It attacks a variety of plants and trees, fruit trees, hardwoods, hops, and it's a great threat to farmland. Now, for several years now, our State Department of Agriculture has been working hand in hand with USDA, Penn State, and others to contain and eradicate this invasive. Along with this coordination, USDA and this committee have been supportive with funding. As more work remains, I strongly urge the committee support the APHIS work on invasives through the Plant Pest and Disease Program and request continued resources to deal specifically with the spotted lanternfly. In addition, as in other states with prominent cervid populations, Pennsylvania continues to search for a cure for chronic wasting disease. For those not familiar with chronic wasting disease, or CWD, it's a neurological disorder impacting deer, elk, and moose populations. And as the name suggests, contracting disease always ends in fatality. While much research and on-the-ground identification has been happening in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Louisiana, just to name a few states, more funding and research is needed to manage and ultimately cure this disease. The 2018 Farm Bill recognizes this issue and actually includes language I proposed providing priority status for chronic wasting disease within APHIS animal health programs. For these reasons, I request that the committee provide full funding for animal disease research, particularly chronic wasting disease. And finally, I'd like to register my strong support for the rural development and rural utility services programs in general. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to working with you as the appropriations process for fiscal year 2020 moves forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. Next, we will hear from Mr. Neil Dunn of Florida. I'm sorry. Mr. Fortenberry?
Mr. Thompson, if you could, for just a moment. All I wanted to do is just thank you for your long leadership on the Agricultural Committee. You've been a stalwart there. The voices that represent agriculture in the Congress have a long continuity of tradition, and you've carried that tradition very honorably and well. I want to thank you.
Well, thank you. As you know, agriculture is, we need a strong farm team.
Yeah.
And I think we have it through this appropriations subcommittee and the work of the Agriculture Committee. That partnership of authorization and appropriations has always been strong, and look forward to continuing that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dunn?
Thank you very much, Chairman Bishop, Ranking Member Fortenberry. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm here to advocate on behalf of our nation's farmers, ranchers, and foresters, and the programs that ensure the continued prosperity of rural America. Most importantly, as Chairman Bishop knows all too well, the southeastern agricultural economy was absolutely devastated by Hurricane Michael in this last year. Hurricanes caused billions of dollars of damage, including $1.5 billion in Florida alone. While I remain hopeful that Congress will pass a supplemental appropriations for fiscal year 19 as soon as possible, these disasters illustrate the critical importance of the farm safety net. We must ensure adequate funding to allow our producers the certainty that when future disasters occur, the federal government has programs in place to keep them going until help arrives. Unfortunately, due to a longer growing cycle, timber producers many times do not have access to these critical programs as other farmers do. I look forward to working with this committee as well as my colleagues on the House Ag committee to correct this going forward. I would also like to urge the committee to continue to prioritize important agricultural research programs like the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative and the land-grant universities research and extension capacity programs. In addition, the 2018 Farm Bill established the framework for investment in our nation's research infrastructure. I support the administration's request for a new $50 million competitive grant program for facilities improvement at land-grant universities. Programs like this support the scientific innovation at the institutions like the University of Florida, Florida State University, and FAMU in Tallahassee. And there are other great schools, obviously, all over the country. Recently, Secretary Perdue announced the first down-select list of communities across the country vying to host the USDA Economic Research Service and National Institute of Food and Agriculture. I strongly support his efforts to ensure that the USDA is the most effective, most efficient, and most customer-focused agency in the federal government. This decision to bring important USDA resources closer to many stakeholders and improve the USDA's ability to attract and retain highly qualified staff is another great step forward toward achieving that very goal. I would also like to commend the Secretary for his commitment to ensure that no ERS or NIFA employee will be involuntarily separated during that transition, and I trust that this committee will provide him with the resources necessary to honor that promise. I request that the committee support the transition and ensure that the relocation is completed as smoothly and efficiently as possible. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Ranking Member, and I yield back.
Mr. Dunn, are you aware that there's a tremendous amount of opposition to that movement of ERS and NIFA?
I had a chance to discuss it with Secretary Perdue, and he was really enthusiastic about it, and he won me over.
Actually, the committee is going to be holding a hearing tomorrow on it, and we'll have, of course, a representative from the Secretary's office as well as other stakeholders who will have a say. We'll hear from them tomorrow, so I'd like to invite you to come and
I'll make every effort to be there, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Fortenberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the chairman rightly points out that this is not yet a settled issue. It's still under debate. We've been forthright in our exchange, and I have a university system that's vying potentially for the site. So we have some differing perspectives. But tomorrow there will be a hearing to unpack objectively the pros and cons of this and some other considerations. So if you can make it, I think you might gain helpful insights.
Thank you very much for your concern.
Yeah, and we remain very grieved by what happened to your district, and we're continuing to try to think creatively as to the appropriate types of assistance that can be applied.
Can't come soon enough, Mr. Ranking Member.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dunn. Appreciate your taking the time to come and share your interest with us.
Always an honor to be here, sir. Thank you. I yield back.
Okay, at this time, we'd like to invite Representative Jennifer Gonzalez-Colon to the podium. Let's say to the table.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome.
I really appreciate to have the time today to express our request coming from Puerto Rico. I'm the sole representative for 3.2 million American citizens on the island. I do represent them in Congress, so I want to thank you, Chairman Bishop and Ranking Member Fortenberry, for actually allowing this to happen. As you're probably aware, Puerto Rico does not participate in the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP. Like our counterparts in the 50 states, District of Columbia, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Guam, since 1981. Instead, Puerto Rico has a capped block grant called Nutritional Assistance Program, or NAP, which is typically funded to $1.8 to $1.9 billion per year. The hurricanes in 2017 reveal the many challenges tied to NAP, starting with the remarkable difference in the benefits our people receive. To give you just an idea of the program on the island, a household of one in Puerto Rico receives $112 per month, while a household of one in the continental states and the District of Columbia receives $194 per month. The amount of funding tied to NAP has proven to be insufficiently, especially in the aftermath of both hurricanes, when people were experiencing extreme financial hardships. Additionally, the $600 million that we are requesting for NAP this year, in additional disaster funds, and I've been advocating for that, included in both in the House version and in the Senate version of the upcoming disaster bill, are not yet available to my constituents. And that's the reason the government of Puerto Rico is cutting more than those $112 per month to the beneficiaries so they can receive some kind of assistance. It comes clear that we need to improve the nutrition assistance program in the island. And with this in mind, I'm requesting your consideration for including report language in the upcoming appropriations bill for the fiscal year 2020 related to Puerto Rico NAP program. And those, my first request is tied to the Thrifty Food Plan. The calculation of our block grant is heavily influenced by the Thrifty Food Plan calculation of the continuous 50 states. So it's totally different for Puerto Rico. However, we import more than 80% of the food items we are consuming. And this is the main factor into the price of consumers, what consumers pay when they are purchasing those items. The proposed language to the report would require USDA to measure the cost of the Thrifty Food Plan in Puerto Rico and give us a better idea of how this calculation will be better addressed and reflect the reality of purchasing food on the island. The second request directs USDA to publish information of the NAP program on their website. One of the reasons why NAP is a challenging program for many to understand is due to the lack of access to reliable data. Having USDA publish information including basic program rules, monthly enrollment and disbursement data, and other program information will increase the transparency and and will inform us on how we potentially can change the program and improve the program, make informed decisions. Like right now, I'm pushing for a complete transition from NAP to the SNAP program. For Puerto Rico, the same way U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and the DC do have. I want to just thank you for the consideration of those requests. We are pushing for the $600 million for the disaster bill that are included specifically for NAP for a year. And believe me, the people of Puerto Rico are really in need. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And I want you to know that we're very much aware of the specific needs of Puerto Rico. And I am in agreement with our colleague, Jose Serrano, who is a very strong advocate for the territories getting equitable treatment with the states. And I know that I have every intention of, for every piece of legislation that we offer that offers anything for states, that the territories be placed in the same condition and be treated with equal dignity. Hopefully we'll be able to implement that policy for the government, because I do understand that it's not an even-handed treatment. With regard to the disaster and the $600 million, as you know, we are doing our very best to get that disaster bill passed. It's my understanding that the Senate will take up their disaster bill and will offer that as an amendment to it either tomorrow or at the latest Thursday. We're hopeful that that will happen. Of course, the consequences of I should say the results of what has happened weather-wise in Nebraska and the Midwest over the last week is going to require some additional amendments and considerations for the losses of the grain and the cattle that occurred there. So that could possibly delay it. We hope that it won't, but as of now, I think Mr. Fortenberry would agree. We don't know what the full estimates are going to be for Nebraska and for the Midwest, and we expect that there'll be some significant additional damages, and we're not really in a position to to allocate, I believe, an adequate amount to deal with those disasters. So I'm hoping that we can go ahead and finish the disaster bill that we passed through the House on the 16th of January, get that done, and if at the appropriate time, be able to do another supplemental to deal with what is inevitable for the Midwest. It's tragic. There's been a lot of loss there, and we don't yet know what the full losses are going to be because snows have not melted and the waters have not gone downstream fully, and we're not fully aware of what the impact is going to be. But we want to get started on that. We're mindful of that, and our thoughts and our prayers will go out to all of those who were impacted. And of course, as far as Puerto Rico is concerned, we hope that we can get that taken care of forthwith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to express same solidarity with our brothers and sisters from Nebraska. We know how difficult it is in any way we can help. Not just with the prayers, but with actions. I would be more than glad, and I want to thank the committee and subcommittee for actually approving the first $600 million. And we've been in conversations on the Senate side with Senator Perdue and Senator Scott to the $600 million that are included already in our Senate version. I would love to have the Senate version approved, and then in the conference, we can put together whatever is missing, because at this time, the bill is standstill, and the people are not receiving the same benefits, even when we receive less than the rest of the people living in the mainland. But thank you for that.
Mr. Fortenberry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Gonzalez-Colon for your concern about the people I represent and others who are so adversely impacted by this flooding. I'll tell you a quick story. I was in a place called T-Bone Cafe, which is in Columbus, Nebraska, and I saw the before pictures before I got there. The wall had a line about 4 foot high where the water and muck came in, and it was just an absolute disaster. By the time I got there, though, a lot of things had been shoveled out and cleaned up, and they looked at me and said, "This is T-Bones. We don't mess around. We're Nebraskans. We get it done." Right outside of there, they have good humor. You know, there's a sign on the fence that said mud wrestling tomorrow. But of course, you ride down the road a little bit, and there's a dead cattle on the side of the road. You're exactly right, Mr. Chairman. The ag losses are going to mount, and it's unclear as to what they were as people just pull themselves together and start cleaning up. The Air Force Base there, which I represent, Offutt Air Force Base, was a third underwater. I'm not sure many people realize that here. It didn't affect our readiness as planes were able to be moved, and that facility also houses Strategic Command, which is our nuclear nerve center, which was unaffected, thankfully. But nonetheless, the damage is very high and real. I think the chairman has it right. There's movement in the Senate to add potentially some new language that will make a conferenceable item with what we did in the House, or the House did last year. And then maybe all of this gets tied up. And if there's some good news out of bad, I think additional problems actually perhaps create more momentum to get something done quickly. In regards to your testimony about report language, what you said seemed to me to be eminently reasonable, so I hope that we can potentially work with you on that, and that may land in the bill. But again, thank you. I don't think most people, you mind if I reference you as Jennifer and I were talking this morning, Jennifer represents 3.2 million people. Now you get to run every 4 years, so it's a little bit different, but 3.2.
I will change that in a bit if I can vote on the floor. I don't mind that.
I mean, every 4 years, right? But the enormity of her job to represent that many constituents only elevates my respect for her intensity to continue to be engaged here at the table. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I might point out that one of the problems with the Senate bill that I hope that we can fix in conference or prior to the time they bring it to the floor is that they don't add any additional money for the Nebraska or the 2019 disasters, and that is a problem because we were hardly able to adequately fund relief for the 2018-2017 storms that we had, and of course we've got to add some additional resources to make good on our capacity to help folks in the Midwest and Nebraska, as well as the people who are already long waiting and then critical stage for relief from the hurricane that occurred back in the fall of 2018. So we've got to do that, and we've got to do it quickly. People in the Southeast are at planting season right now, and if we don't get this bill passed very soon, we're going to have a lot of people that won't be able to plant, will not be able to service their operation loans from last year, and will find themselves out of business. Lenders are very, very concerned because they don't know what to do. They don't know what resources will be available to give to the farmers who will then be able to service that debt. So we've got a real critical situation, and I'm hopeful that by the end of this week that we can have it addressed and get something to the president for his signature.
I agree on that, Chairman, and I just want to add my being very grateful to you guys and for Congressman Jose Serrano. I know he's not running for re-election after yesterday's announcement of him having the Parkinson's disease, but he's been a great advocate for the people of Puerto Rico for many, many years. And he's always been more than a friend to me, like a mentor. He's been helping us out in equality issues across the island for many, many years. And I know everything that we've managed to include during the last 5-10 years has been because of his hand in the committee. So please, I want to thank him, but I want to thank all of you for having Puerto Rico in your hearts.
Thank you. Committee will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair. Welcome, Mr. McGovern. I know that you have a very busy schedule, and so we appreciate your being able to break away and come and to spend a little time with us.
Well, thank you.
And we'll be happy to entertain whatever thoughts you may have on our 2020 appropriations bill in the process.
So Chairman Bishop and Ranking Member Fortenberry and my colleague Mr. Pocan and members of the Agriculture Subcommittee, thanks for allowing me to testify here today. I appreciate it. As your subcommittee begins drafting the appropriations legislation, I strongly urge you to provide robust funding for programs that work to end hunger across our country. You know, as we're the richest country in the history of the world, and yet we have close to 40 million Americans who are food insecure, who don't know where the next meal is going to come from. And I believe that hunger is a political condition. I think we have the power and the resources to end hunger in the United States. What we need is the political will. A few weeks ago, I testified before the Budget Committee in support of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP, which is a mandatory program. I urged the committee to protect the structure of SNAP, which is our nation's first line of defense against hunger, and oppose any efforts to diminish participation of able-bodied adults without dependents. Today, I urge this committee to provide at least $3 billion for the SNAP Contingency Reserve Account to ensure that all participants have continued access to benefits even if the program incurs unanticipated expenses or events. The Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, WIC, provides 6.8 million low-income pregnant and parenting women and children access to nutritious food, education, and other services. And I strongly urge the committee to continue to fully fund WIC at $6.1 billion, including the, at minimum, $67 million for the breastfeeding peer counseling program. I also want to highlight the work of charitable organizations like our food banks in alleviating hunger across the country. But the truth of the matter is, Mr. Chairman, charities alone cannot solve hunger. It takes a strong federal commitment as well. The Emergency Food Assistance Program, known as TFAP, provides highly nutritious food that food banks pair with donated items to craft packages for their clients. Although TFAP commodities funding is mandatory, TFAP storage and distribution funds are discretionary, and I urge the committee to continue to provide robust funding for the storage and distribution account. I also urge this committee to increase funding for Nutrition Programs Administration. Staff morale at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service has shown need for improvement in recent years. Staff at FNS are largely focused on SNAP integrity, but at the same time, other programs, including child nutrition and regional operations, often suffer. I urge this committee to continue to provide robust funding for Nutrition Programs Administration so that they can expand adequate coverage to all of their programs. Mr. Chairman, I would like to next say a few words about our international food aid programs. As you know, I led the effort to create the George McGovern Robert Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program. Congress established the program in the 2002 Farm Bill, and since that time it has provided literally millions of the most vulnerable children in the world with a nutritious meal in a school setting for over a decade. Each year, USDA receives more proposals than it can fund, highlighting the need to expand the program rather than reduce or eliminating funding. I have visited many McGovern Dole programs in Latin America and Africa, and you may have as well. I can testify that these programs advance the health and productivity of children. They improve their school performance, increase attendance rates, especially amongst girls, and solidify community support for education, health, and nutrition. And I'm very grateful to this committee for maintaining level funding or providing modest increases each fiscal year, often under very tight budget constraints. For FY 2020, I and many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle are asking for $235 million from McGovern Dole, an increase of $25 million. Second, PL 480, Title II, Food for Peace, is our most important humanitarian food aid program, as well as supporting projects that address chronic food insecurity. As the world faces its greatest refugee crisis since World War II and increasing numbers of natural disasters, we cannot cut funding for this program. It is simply unfathomable to think otherwise. This program supports American farmers whose commodities literally save tens of millions of lives each year. The program is now even more effective in getting food to those in need rapidly and effectively, combining meals ready to eat, vouchers, cash grants, local purchase, and U.S. commodities. And for the past couple of years, Food for Peace has received about $1.7 billion each year. And for FY 2020, it needs to receive at least that level funding, and I would recommend a more substantial increase to $1.9 billion, given the many existing crises requiring urgent attention and the knowledge that more are surely likely to come in the next 12 months. McGovern Dole and Food for Peace advance U.S. national interests and reflect the very best of American values. I urge continued robust funding and marked increases if possible for each. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, I just want to speak briefly about another issue unrelated to food and nutrition. Since 2008, my hometown of Worcester, Massachusetts, has been dealing with the largest Asian longhorn beetle infestation in North America. More than 35,000 trees have been cut down, and eradication and replanting efforts continue. I urge the subcommittee to provide at least $54 million for tree and wood pests under USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, including at least $42 million for efforts to eradicate the Asian longhorn beetle, ALB, with no state or local cost share requirement. I can just tell you that in my neighborhood, my neighborhood was literally transformed overnight. When I left for Washington one day, there were trees everywhere. When I came back, I couldn't see a tree in sight. That's how dangerous and these Asian longhorn beetles are. And we have made progress, but we need to make sure they don't return. And I just say finally, you know, I think that the best of America is represented in our food and nutrition programs. And I think without them, you know, we would see hunger around the world increase dramatically, and we would see more instability around the world. So I think these are smart investments, and I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. I think over the past several years, this subcommittee has been, I think, very thoughtful in supporting both of those programs and the SNAP program as well. The nutrition programs are vital. It's a key part of our mission, and I think the committee has been very supportive, and and that's been on a bipartisan basis. I think last year I was the ranking member. Mr. Adderholt was the chair, and we worked very well in trying to assure adequate funding for both programs, and I think we were successful in doing it, and I'm hopeful that this year we can continue to support them. They're sound programs. They do a lot for the people that are the recipients, but they also do a lot for us in terms of our foreign policy. So I would be supportive. Mr. Fortenberry?
I just want to thank you, Mr. McGovern, for your long-held advocacy in this ever-critical space of food security. And we call it the Farm Bill, but it really is about food security. Risk mitigation, processes, policies for our farmers and ranchers, and for those who are in vulnerable circumstances, access to nutritious, good food. So I recall finally the days when we worked together as in leadership on Nutrition Subcommittee on Ag. But again, appreciate your passion and consciousness around this most critical of American issues. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And I just want to point out, you know, these programs are not extravagant. I mean, the average SNAP benefit is about $1.40 per person per meal. And most SNAP recipients end up going to food banks midway through the month in order to have enough food for their families. So, you know, these are vital. You know, I guess I said before, I mean, nobody in this country should ever have to go hungry, and I think this program goes a long way in dealing with that.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
McGovern.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, at this time, I'm happy to recognize the gentlelady from Texas, the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee, one of the most hardworking members of this Congress. Welcome, Ms. Lee, to our subcommittee, and we'd be delighted to hear your thoughts about our 2020 appropriations process for agriculture, rural development, Food and Drug Administration, and related agencies.
I thank the chairman for his graciousness, gracious comments, and to the ranking member. I've had the opportunity to work with both of you, as well as my chair, Mr. Pocan, on the CPC. But let me just say that my view of America is that we are the breadbasket for both our nation and around the world. Over the years, I have worked with so many organizations dealing with the issue of hunger. And certainly there are more to that as I look at your regulation over food and drug. I'm reminded of an incident that is occurring with those of us who've been breast cancer survivors in the utilization of a certain implant that has caused a great illness or recurrence of breast cancer. So your appropriations is important on many levels, and I want to thank you for your very important work. I also want to thank you, generally speaking, for your important work for farmers and for the agricultural community. Interestingly enough, my district, as large as it is, has been have added areas that can be subjected to the rural development funding, and I can assure you that is powerful to small communities. So let me just quickly say that I am supporting the $85 billion for supplemental nutrition program. I would always argue for more because SNAP is a cornerstone of the nation's nutrition assistance. It is a safety net, and it really goes to the question of hunger. Many of you know my predecessor, the Honorable Mickey Leland, who was the founding co-chair with the Congressman Emerson, the late Congressman Emerson from the Midwest, to deal with hunger in America. We are still there. We're still there. I support $6.5 billion for special supplemental nutrition program, the WIC program, and I think I heard Mr. McGovern say that these are not handout programs. These are programs that give families an equal stair steps for families who get it just automatically because of their status in life. They provide for their infants, their children. They provide good, clean milk for their infants and toddlers, and we need to do so for our children who are not as economically advantaged. I support $329 million for emergency food assistance, and I support $55 million for USDA Summer Electronic. Let me say to you that during Hurricane Harvey, my community, people were starving. I'm being very frank with you. They were not able to access, either because of their resources, the devastation of their home, this catastrophic event. And thank you to the state working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to be able to give us that emergency disaster food dollars. And we served, in addition to those who had already gotten it, when we determined that people were still in need around the October timeframe, we were able to provide 30,000 more new people because of these resources, the ability to access food that took them through the November and December timeframe. This is a lifeline to people, and I attest to its importance. I support $35 million for grants under Section 105 that deals with, and $22 million for Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program, and this provides low-income seniors with coupons that can be exchanged for eligible food. I support the $240 million for commodity supplemental program used in my district, and I support the $100 million for the TEFAP storage distribution, $36 million for the pollinator, which focuses on research and decline in pollinator populations, and I support that, most notably that of commercial honeybees. I support the $62 million for the Evan Allen's program that deals with awards to African American in agriculture. We have black farmers in Houston and Texas, and I have worked with them over the years. I support $35 million for the Healthy Food Finance Initiative, and then I support all of the programs dealing with animal protection, National Veterinary Medical, that's $6.5 million, $70.5 million for horse protection, and $28.7 million for the Animal Welfare Act. As relates to the rural development, the $350 million for commodity futures trading I support, and I support the $40 million for Hispanic serving agricultural colleges, which we worked together with my colleague who was here previously. We worked on HSIs, who play a crucial role in addressing this education, enrolling 57% of the Hispanic college students. I support the $16.9 million for the USDA Circuit Rider Program, and I certainly support the work that the agricultural funding is doing for the HBCUs in working extensively with them, and I know your commitment. Finally, let me say, as I mentioned, I am the successor to the Honorable Mickey Leland, so we've been talking about hunger for a very long time. It is tragic that there are children that go to bed hungry here in the United States. And anything that we can do to provide I'll use the word small, not because it is small, but because in the measure of the largesse of this appropriation, the largesse of this budget and largesse of our economy here in the United States, to stop these children from going to school and going to bed without the right kind of nutrition. I am almost predominantly, one of my school districts, Title I school. We have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It is only through your funding. And in the summertime, we're able to open our parks to feed our children only through this funding. And I believe that was Mickey's passion. Of course, he saw hunger around the world, but it was his passion that people not go to bed hungry. As you know, he organized the Mickey Leland Hunger Center that is still going, training young people how to deal with hunger in terms of going into communities and finding creative ways to not have people suffer because of their status, their economic status or non-status, and their ability to provide for their family. And it should be made known that people don't do this purposely. They don't do this purposely. They do this because they're in need. My final point is I represent something called the Interfaith Ministries. They are the largest Meals on Wheels program, which is so very important to our seniors. And I have gone out with the meals, knocked on doors, and see what a vital program the Meals on Wheels program is. So I want to thank you for your work. I've tried to cover things that are so important to my constituency, but as you support our farming industry, our small farmers, large entities, I think it should be reminded that you are feeding people who otherwise would not eat without the various programs that are under your umbrella, and the rural development that helps so many communities like mine get an ambulance and help build a devastated police station after the hurricane. Small towns that benefit from these programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. You were very, very thorough. You touched upon all of the programs, and you certainly remind us that we live in a country where we produce the highest quality, the safest, the most abundant, and the most economical food and fiber anywhere in the world. And there's absolutely no reason why we should have food deserts or why there should be hunger. And I hope through this committee and the subcommittee that we will do our dead level best to try to reduce that and eliminate it if possible, so that we can really have a healthy nation, and that we can have healthy people, and we can help our friends outside of our country to be healthy also. So thank you very much for your comments, and I yield to Mr. Fortenberry for any comments that he might like to make.
Well, let me echo what the chairman just said in terms of your breadth of not only understanding but advocacy for a whole range of agricultural policies that are essential to both sides of the agricultural question. The idea of the support mechanisms that create the conditions by which we have the lowest grocery prices in the world, and yet combining that with the humanitarian impulse that Americans have to help those most in need. To the idea, you're exactly right, of seeing or hearing about a child going to bed and hungry in America, it is heart-wrenching given our abundance and largesse, and yet at the same time we respond because we have the capacity to respond and the humanitarian impulse to do so as well. So thank you for reminding of that, of that essential public policy that's born out of conscience. If I could divert one moment, you talked about your interfaith ministry work. How's Pastor Rudy?
Doing
Do you
very
remember
well.
when I told you I met him on a plane?
Yes, Rudy
Is he part of
Rasmus,
this?
St. John's, yes, trying to build more housing for the unhoused, actual homeless people on the streets.
Would you give him my regards,
I will
please?
certainly do so. Still working, let's put it that way,
All
still
right.
working.
Thank you
Still
very
working,
much.
still feeding, still working.
Mr. Pocan?
Nothing really to add other than, Ms. Jackson Lee is such a fierce advocate for her values. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the time.
With that, I think we have
Thank you for your
completed our
patience.
business, and this committee will stand adjourned.